The kitchen was loud, hot, and full of shouting aliens. Steam hissed from giant pots, blades clanged against cutting boards, and spices from 10 planets filled the air. It was lunch hour in the grand food court of Station Zarnath 5, the biggest trade hub in this part of the galaxy. Alien chefs with long arms, glowing eyes, and tentacle fingers worked fast to prepare food for hungry travelers, soldiers, nobles, and merchants. But in the middle of all the noise, the door opened with a soft creak, and someone stepped inside quietly. He was human, dust on his boots, patches on his jacket, and tired eyes that didn't blink much. He had no weapons, no bags, no translator device, just a folded piece of paper in one hand. A few alien staff turned to look and frowned. Humans were rare here, especially ones without an invitation. The alien head chef, a wide-shouldered Kravari with 3 eyes and 6 knives hanging from his belt, walked up with a grunt. "We're busy," he said. "No guests allowed in the back." The human didn't answer. He just held out the paper, an old flyer that said, "Help wanted, kitchen staff." The head chef snorted, then laughed loudly. "You? A human? You'll cut off your own fingers in one shift." Still, the human didn't speak. He looked the chef in the eyes and said only one line. "I don't talk much, sir, but I can cook." The kitchen fell silent for a moment. Then the other chefs burst into laughter. One of them, a green-skinned Siluran with floating wrist knives, said, "You cook? What, boiled grass and salt cubes?" Another added, "Maybe he can make toast if we lend him fire." The human didn't react. He just stood there, calm and quiet, as if none of the insults mattered. Suddenly, a heavy boot echoed behind them. The laughing stopped. Everyone turned to see a tall, scarred alien walk in. He was the owner of the restaurant, a retired general named Theric, known for winning battles and breaking bones now. He ran this kitchen like a battlefield, strict, fast, and with pride. "What's going on?" Tariq asked, his voice deep and slow. The head chef bowed slightly. "A human, sir, looking for work? Says he can cook." Tharic looked the human up and down. He saw the way he stood, balanced, quiet, alert. He saw the burn scars on his hands, the steady eyes, the tired body. He saw something the others missed. "What's your name, human?" Tariq asked. The human paused, then said softly, "Darren." "No last name?" The human shook his head once. Tharic nodded. "All right, Darren. You want a job? Show me what you can do." He waved to the small test station, 1 pot, 1 pan, and a few ingredients on a side shelf. "Make something, anything." The other chefs rolled their eyes, ready to watch the human fail. Darren walked to the station without a word. He looked at the ingredients, a bruised root vegetable, half an onion-like fruit, some strange herbs, and a piece of dry protein sponge. Not much and nothing fancy. He lit the fire, cleaned the pot, and began. No flair, no tricks, no drama, just quick, precise movements. Slice, stir, taste, stir again. The kitchen went quiet again. Something about the way he moved. It felt like a rhythm, like a quiet song only he could hear. The smell began to rise. Not strong, not spicy, but deep and warm. It smelled like comfort, like a home no one had visited in years. Even the alien chefs stopped pretending to laugh. One leaned forward, nose twitching, eyes wide. Darren finished the dish, wiped the bowl clean with a cloth, and placed it on the table in front of Tariq. A simple stew, brownish, thick, with steam rising gently. Tariq took a spoon and tasted it. His eyes blinked once, then twice. He didn't speak for 10 seconds. Then he set the spoon down slowly and said, "This tastes like the food I had during the war, when we had no supplies, no fancy sauces, just whatever we could cook with love and sorrow." No one spoke, even the head chef stared in disbelief. Tariq looked at Darren again. "Who taught you to cook like this?" he asked, his voice low. Darren just stared back, saying nothing. Only his tired eyes spoke. Full of stories no one had asked to hear. Tariq stood up and nodded. "You start tomorrow, Darren," he said. "Welcome to my kitchen." By morning, Darren had already cleaned the entire prep station. He didn't ask questions, didn't complain, didn't even speak unless spoken to. The alien staff watched him from a distance, silent, focused, and strange. He wasn't like other humans they'd met before. He didn't talk about Earth, or act weak or ask for help. He just cooked. The kitchen had always been ruled by noise and ego. Each chef believed they were the best, trained in galaxy-famous culinary schools. They decorated their dishes with glowing sauces, fire trails, and chemical smoke. They cooked to impress, to show off, to win, but Darren, he didn't care about any of that. He cooked like it was breathing, like he didn't know anything else. And worse for them, everyone was noticing by noon. The regular customers started asking strange questions. Who made the stew today? Why does the side dish taste emotional? Who's the quiet one in the back? One of the chefs, Rullick, who had 8 arms and 10 medals from the Royal Culinary Court, felt the anger burning in his gut. How can a human with no diploma, no training, no tentacles, cook better than me? He snapped. He slammed a tray down, cracking it in half. Another chef, Celari, flicked her knife across the counter and hissed. He's just lucky, nothing more, but inside, they were afraid because deep down, they knew he wasn't lucky, he was better, Tharik. The owner and former general didn't say much, but he started giving Darren more tasks by the 3rd day. Darren was cooking 3 full meals during peak hours. Even the delivery drivers started sneaking bites of leftovers before leaving. One evening, a surprise visitor arrived at the restaurant. An alien woman in glowing robes with 4 eyes and a gold-plated spoon hanging from her neck. She was Fira, the food critic from the planet Virax Prime. Her reviews could destroy a kitchen's reputation in 1 sentence, or turn it into legend overnight. The head chef ran to greet her, shaking slightly. She raised one hand. "I'm not here for you," she said coldly. "I've heard of the human." All eyes turned to Darren, who was just finishing plating a simple grilled root with spice-dusted protein cubes. He looked up, nodded once, and served it quietly. No words, no bow, no fear. Fira sat alone at a table, tasted the dish slowly, 1 bite at a time. The kitchen staff peeked from the back, barely breathing. After a long pause, Fira stood up, placed her spoon on the table, and walked back to the kitchen. No one dared speak. She looked Darren in the eyes and whispered, "This reminded me of my mother's garden. My mother is dead." Then she turned and left without another word. The room stayed quiet for a full minute, then Tharik said, "That's the highest praise she's ever given anyone." The alien chefs didn't cheer. They stared, silent and bitter. Some were trembling. Some were pale, some were furious. Later that night, Rullick threw his knives against the wall. "This is a kitchen, not a funeral home," he shouted. "He's tricking them with emotion, not skill." Celari nodded. "He's dangerous. He's making us look useless." They gathered in secret after hours. In the supply room, a plan was forming, a test, they said. "Let's challenge him," Rullick growled. "In front of everyone, a public match, where everyone can taste the difference." The next morning, Tharik walked in and found a crowd forming in the dining area. Rullick stood on the front counter and shouted, "Today, we honor tradition. We challenge the newcomer Darren to a duel of dishes. 1 hour. 1 plate, 1 winner," gasps filled the air. Chefs from other kitchens had shown up, customers too. Even a camera crew from a local channel hovered in the air, recording every second. Tharik looked at Darren. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Darren wiped his hands with a cloth, nodded once, and stepped forward. "I'll cook," he said softly. The table was set. Rullick picked expensive ingredients, imported meats, glowing fruits, high-end oils. Darren took leftovers, bruised roots, and a small jar of fermented broth he had made himself. The hour started and both worked in silence. Rullick moved like a dancer, flipping flames, slicing fast, pouring liquid light. Darren moved like a builder, slow, careful, focused. Each touch was deliberate. Each step had meaning. When the hour ended, the 2 dishes were placed side by side. One was glowing, bright, colorful, like a painting. The other was simple, warm-colored, and smelled like something ancient and kind. The first judge, a grumpy Zarn warrior, tasted Rullick's dish, then Darren's. His eyes widened and he said nothing. The second judge tasted both, then nodded slowly at Darren. The third judge stood up and walked away, whispering, "I need to call my wife." With tears in his eyes, Rullick stood frozen. He had never lost a challenge in his life. Now, he stared at Darren like he was looking at a ghost. Darren bowed his head slightly and walked back to the kitchen. Not a single word spoken. The kitchen was not the same anymore, ever since the cooking duel. Darren's silence felt heavier, louder, more respected. The staff no longer laughed behind his back. They whispered now, afraid, curious, confused. How could a human, a species known more for war than taste, cook like that? Rullick, the proud alien chef who had challenged Darren and lost, didn't come to work the next day. Rumors spread, some said he quit. Others said he broke his knives in shame, but one thing was clear. Darren had become the center of attention, even if he didn't want to be one evening. Theric stepped into the kitchen holding a datapad. "Darren," he said, "you've been invited to the Galactic Fusion Feast. It was the most famous cooking event in this part of the galaxy. Each top restaurant could send only one chef to compete." Darren just nodded and went back to chopping. The other chefs stood frozen. Salary's hand twitched as she held her blade. "He's going to represent us," she said under her breath. "This isn't fair." That night, as the restaurant closed and lights dimmed, Salary sneaked back in, her eyes burning with rage. She walked to Darren's prep station, opened one of his spice jars, and slipped in a few drops of clear liquid from a black vial. The poison was tasteless, but it would react badly with heat. Not deadly, but enough to ruin the dish and make him look like a fraud. "He won't even know what happened," she whispered, then left quietly. The day of the Galactic Fusion Feast arrived. The spaceport buzzed with excitement. Cooks from across the stars stood in rows, horned, scaled, feathered, and robotic. Each had a team, high-tech tools, fancy gear, and flashing banners, but Darren stood alone, in his old patched apron holding a wooden spoon. The judges explained the rules. One dish, no limits, no translators allowed. Only your food will speak. Time 1 hour. Theric placed a hand on Darren's shoulder before it began. "You don't need to win," he said softly. "You already changed this kitchen forever." The timer began, and chaos filled the arena. Flames rose, machines hummed. Spices flew through the air. Darren worked quietly, his face calm, his hands steady. But as he reached for the spice jar, the one Salary tampered with, he paused. He sniffed it, blinked once, then set it aside without a word. Instead, he took dried herbs from his own pocket, crushed them in his palm, and added them slowly to the mix. He adjusted the heat, changed the broth, and continued cooking like nothing happened. In the audience, Salary watched with cold eyes. She expected his dish to collapse, for judges to cough and spit it out. But nothing went wrong, in fact. The smell from Darren's pot started drifting across the arena. Strong, earthy, nostalgic, so real it made some chefs pause mid-cut. One by one, the judges arrived at Darren's station. They didn't speak, they just tasted, and each one froze. Some smiled softly, one closed his eyes, another began crying silently. "What is this?" one judge whispered. "It tastes like when my mother tucked me in during the war." Another whispered, "It's the last meal I had before I lost my home." Darren said nothing. He just nodded, then stepped back, letting the food speak. At the final announcement, the head judge stood before the crowd. "This year's winner," she began, "is not the most colorful or the most technical. But his food reached our memories, our pain, our hearts, and the winner is the human from Station Zarnath 5. The arena exploded in applause. Darren didn't smile, he didn't raise his hands. He just bowed slightly and walked away, back at the station. The restaurant celebrated, except for Salary, who sat alone in the back corner. Silent and sweating, she had failed to sabotage him. Worse, he somehow knew. That night, after the lights dimmed and staff went home, Darren stayed behind, cleaning the counters. As he packed up his ingredients, he reached for the same spice jar. He looked at it quietly, opened it, smelled it again, then walked to the trash bin and dumped it. Salary stood hidden behind the supply shelf. Holding her breath, he had known, he had spared her. Why? Darren turned his head slightly as if sensing her. Without looking, he said one soft line. "I came to cook, not to hurt." Then he left the kitchen, the door closing behind him like a whisper. The kitchen was quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was a different kind, soft, respectful, almost peaceful. Ever since Darren returned from the Galactic Fusion Feast with the winning seal, things had changed. Even the most proud alien chefs now lowered their voices around him. Salari hadn't spoken to anyone for 3 days. She didn't confess what she had done, but she didn't need to. Everyone saw the way Darren handled the poison incident with calm, quiet grace. No report, no revenge. Not even a scolding, just a simple line. "I came to cook, not to hurt." Tharic watched all of this from his office. Arms folded, he had seen war, betrayal, even rebellions in his time. But never had he seen a kitchen transformed by one man who barely spoke. Late that evening, when the last plate was washed and the tables wiped clean, Tharic called Darren to his office. The human walked in, still wearing his apron, face unreadable as always. "Sit," Tharik said, pouring 2 glasses of a sweet, smoky drink. Darren sat silently. I've seen many cooks in my life, Tharik began. On battlefields, in bunkers, in royal ships, in slums. But I've never tasted food like yours. Simple, but it stays in the heart. Darren just stared, saying nothing. Tharik leaned forward, lowering his voice. Tell me, human, he said. What's the secret behind your cooking? There was a long pause. Then Darren finally spoke, voice low and slow. I used to be a prisoner, he said. During the human-Kareth conflict, Sector 9, Tharik's brow lifted. That war had been one of the bloodiest in history, Darren continued. We were captured, 20 of us. They didn't kill us, just locked us in a broken cargo ship on a dead moon. No food, no heat, only scraps, rusted tools, and silence. The room felt colder suddenly. I found an old stove unit, Darren said, eyes far away now, and a pile of expired rations. No flavor, no color, just blocks of survival paste. But I remembered my mother's voice, saying, if you cook with love, even dust can taste like a feast. Tharik didn't blink. Darren continued. I cooked with whatever I could find, scrap herbs, old spice shavings, filtered water from pipes. Every meal I made, 1 person smiled, then 2, then they stopped fighting. They stopped crying. His voice cracked a little. 17 of us survived, he said, not because of weapons or strength, but because someone kept cooking for a while. Tharik didn't say anything. He looked at the glass in his hand, then at the man in front of him. You don't just feed the stomach, Tharik finally said. You feed the soul, Darren nodded once. That's all I know how to do, he whispered. Just then, a soft knock came at the office door. It was a young alien server holding a message tablet. Sir, she said nervously. There's a request for Darren, Tharik frowned. From who? The girl looked confused. From the royal family of Zarnax Prime. Everyone in the galaxy knew that name. The Zarnax were known for their strict traditions, royal feasts, and impossibly high food standards. Darren didn't react. He simply stood up, bowed slightly, and said, I will go. That night, as he packed a few basic tools, Salary came to see him. She looked nervous, her eyes not meeting his. I poisoned your spices, she said. I'm sorry. Darren looked at her, then down at the small spice pouch in his hand. It's all right, he said quietly. You were scared. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked, voice shaking. He shrugged. Because everyone deserves one more chance. Salary bit her lip. I don't understand you, Darren. Your food, your silence. It's not normal. Darren gave a soft smile, the kind that faded quickly. I'm not trying to be normal, he said. I'm just trying to feed something that's hungry. Even if it's not the stomach, then he left, walking out of the kitchen with only his old apron, a bag of scraps, and the weight of memories heavier than words. The royal cruiser from Zarnax Prime shimmered like liquid glass in the sky. Its golden hull reflected the stars as it landed near the edge of Station Zarnath 5. Dozens of guards in silver armor stood outside, waiting, but they weren't there to protect a king or guard a queen. They had come for one man, a cook. Darren stepped off the station ramp with only a cloth bag in his hand. No guards, no escort, no fancy clothes, just the same old apron tied around his waist. His boots were worn, his face unreadable, his presence calm like a silent flame. He didn't speak as the guards opened the royal doors for him. He didn't flinch when the protocol AI scanned his body. He simply walked straight into the royal dining chamber like he belonged there. Inside, the palace staff stared in confusion. He's the chef? Someone whispered. He looks like a miner, not a master, another muttered. The royal culinary director, a tall, four-legged woman with glowing blue skin, stepped forward and frowned. We expected someone more presentable, she said. Darren only nodded. I came to cook, he replied softly. The challenge was clear. Cook a meal for the royal heir's bonding ceremony. A single dish to be served in front of ambassadors, nobles, and galactic leaders. If the food impressed, it would be remembered for generations. If it failed, the cook would be banned from royal kitchens forever. Darren requested one simple thing: privacy. He asked for a quiet room with a single burner and ingredients of his choosing. No machines, no assistants, no cameras, just space to create. The staff didn't understand, but they obeyed. As Darren entered the cooking room and locked the door, someone else was watching from the shadows. Salari, filled with shame and guilt, had followed him to the palace. She hid in the servant quarters, hoping to see his work, maybe learn from him. But someone else had followed too, Rullick, the chef Darren defeated in the public challenge. His pride was shattered, and now his anger had turned bitter and wild. He's just a human, Rullick growled to himself, crouched outside the cooking room door. He doesn't deserve this honor. Inside, Darren was preparing his ingredients. He mixed spices by hand, ground herbs with the edge of a spoon. He boiled broth in silence, stirred it like he was remembering something old and painful. Suddenly a noise behind him, the door creaked open. Though it had been locked, he turned, but it was too late. A hot flash of liquid splashed across his arm. He gasped as boiling oil struck his skin. Rullick stood there, eyes wide with rage, holding a flask. "You stole everything," he hissed. "You made me nothing," Darren didn't scream. He just grabbed a towel, pressed it to his burning arm, and stepped back. Rullick ran before the guards could arrive. Disappearing into the darkness minutes later, Salary pushed through the crowd and found Darren alone. His sleeve was soaked, his arm blistered. But his hands were still moving. "You need a medic," she shouted, but he shook his head. "No time," he said. "The food must be ready." "You can't cook like this," she cried. "I have to," Darren replied. Pain is part of the recipe now. With one hand trembling and the other wrapped tightly, Darren returned to the stove. He worked slower now, but every movement was still careful, still precise. He didn't need perfection. He needed truth. An hour later, the dish was ready. A single bowl of spiced grain, soaked in bone broth, topped with roasted root slices and a drizzle of honey wine reduction. It didn't shine or glow. It didn't float or dance like alien foods often did. But it smelled like peace. It smelled like memory. The guards escorted him to the royal hall. Dozens of nobles and aliens turned their heads to look at him, some curious, some disgusted. The royal heir, a young Zarnax noble with golden eyes, lifted the spoon and took one bite. His expression didn't change at first. Then he closed his eyes, leaned back, and whispered, "This is what I felt when my mother held me after I was sick." I don't know how he knew, but this is it. The hall went silent, then applause. Slow, rising, powerful. Darren didn't smile. He just bowed and turned to leave, his burned arm hidden beneath his sleeve. Behind him, the nobles began to whisper, not about his scars or his silence, but about the taste that made them feel something they hadn't felt in years. As he left the palace, Solari ran up behind him. "I saw what you did," she said. "I saw what he did to you." Darren didn't answer. He just looked at her and said, "It was worth it." The next day, every screen on Station Zarnath 5 showed the same headline: "Human chef moves royal heir to tears. Galaxy takes notice." For the first time in history, a silent cook with no title, no planet of power, and no famous name had fed the soul of royalty. Darren didn't watch the news. He was back in the kitchen, scrubbing pots like nothing had happened. His burnt arm was bandaged, his movements slow but steady. To him, nothing had changed, but to everyone else it had. Crowds began forming outside the restaurant, not to eat, but to glimpse the man who didn't speak but somehow made people cry with food. Chefs from nearby stations arrived to learn. Writers tried to sneak in for interviews. One alien ambassador even offered to pay Darren 500,000 credits just to host a private dinner. He refused every single one. He still wore the same apron, used the same wooden spoon, and still said only what was needed. But curiosity burned inside the staff. Who was he, really? Why had no one ever heard of him before? One evening, Tharik sat beside Darren during break time. He poured 2 glasses of warm spice brew and said, "You've been here long enough. I think we deserve to know who you really are." Darren didn't answer at first. He stared at the drink in front of him, then finally said, "My name isn't just Darren. In the war files, I was listed as D7441. Property of Kareth, Work Camp 12. The room fell quiet. Only the soft hum of the ceiling fans could be heard. "I was a tech boy," he continued, "before the war. I fixed machines on Mars colonies. Then the bombing started, and we were told to run. But I stayed behind to help shut down reactors. Got captured instead." Salary had entered the room without speaking. Listening from behind a crate of flour, Darren went on. "In Camp 12, there were no names, only numbers, no talking, no resting, no music, no hope. They gave us 1 bowl of nutrient paste a day, nothing else." He looked up for a second, his eyes glinting. "But the old man in my block, he hid spices. Tiny things, crushed under his blanket. Smells that reminded him of his family. One night, he let me heat water, Darren said softly, and I added the spices. It was the first time I saw someone smile in that place. So I kept doing it. The others were still frozen, listening like it was a holy story. Darren's voice didn't shake, didn't rise, didn't seek sympathy. He wasn't telling this for attention. He was simply telling the truth. I cooked with stolen scraps. Boiled roots when we had them. Dried seaweed from outside the fences. Sometimes just flavored air and hot water. But people stopped dying in their minds. They remembered who they were. And then, Tariq asked quietly, one day the guards changed, Darren said. They didn't check the food room. So I made stew for the entire block, not much, just enough for 1 spoon each. But we all shared. When they found out, they beat me. Twice. But they didn't stop me. Tariq leaned back in his chair, taking a long breath. And that's why you cook like this, he said. Darren nodded. Cooking is the only language I remember well. No one cared about my words. But when I fed someone, they listened. Salary stepped forward then, holding a cloth in her hand. I cleaned your station, she said. I found this. She handed him a folded piece of paper, old and torn at the edges. It was a drawing, childlike, done in pencil, a woman. A young boy and a steaming bowl underneath were the words, written in faded ink. Come home safe, love, Mama's waiting. Darren took the paper slowly, his fingers trembling for the first time. He didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes, and for a moment, it looked like he might cry, but he didn't. Tariq stood up and saluted him, not like a boss to a worker, but like a soldier to a hero. You have a name, Tariq said firmly, not a number. From now on, we call you what you truly are, Chef Darren, Salary smiled softly. And teacher, she added. Darren looked at both of them, then back at the old drawing. His lips moved for a moment, forming a silent word, home. Then slowly, he folded the paper and tucked it back into his apron, ready to cook again, not as a prisoner, not as a survivor, but as a man whose food healed more than hunger. Months passed, and the world outside Station Zarnath 5 kept changing. More ships arrived every day, more colonies rose from dust, and more species traveled across the stars. But inside the quiet corner of the spaceport, something softer was growing, something warmer. Chef Darren didn't open a fancy restaurant. He didn't take royal contracts or sign deals with food empires. He opened a small wooden stall, built with salvaged parts, cloth banners, and reused cooking tools. No lights, no robots, no screens, just a stove, a cutting board, and one old spoon. At first, people laughed. Why would the most famous chef in the galaxy serve food from a tent? But they came anyway, one by one, curious and hungry. And when they tasted what he made, they stopped laughing because the food spoke. There was no menu. Darren looked into people's eyes, watched how they sat, how they held themselves. Then he cooked what their hearts needed, not what their mouths wanted. A bowl of broth for the homesick, a plate of soft bread for the lonely, a spoon of sweetness for the grieving. They called it the kitchen for all. There were no prices, no guards, no rules. Just a single wooden sign that read, if you're hungry, you're welcome. Salary worked beside him now. She no longer wore her old chef uniform. Instead, she tied her hair back with a scarf and served bowls with a smile. She had learned more from Darren than any academy could teach, not just cooking, but why we cook. Aliens from every planet came to see him. Old warriors, street kids, space pilots, widows, janitors, and even former prisoners. They sat on crates, leaned against walls, and shared quiet meals. And something strange happened. They started talking. The shy robot told a joke. The horned warrior wiped a tear. A rich merchant handed his coat to a freezing miner. Food had melted the walls between them one evening. As stars blinked outside the dome windows, Tariq came to visit. He wasn't wearing his old medals or boots. Just simple clothes and tired eyes. He sat on a stool and said, You changed more than just this kitchen, Darren. Darren served him a hot bowl of stew. Everyone's hungry for something, he replied. Sometimes it's not food, Tariq ate quietly. Then smiled. I used to feed soldiers, he said. But I never thought food could end battles. Darren just nodded. Behind them, a child spilled her soup instead of crying. She laughed, and so did the older alien beside her. They cleaned it up together. Smiling like old friends that same night, a transport ship landed nearby. From it came a group of new arrivals, poor settlers from a broken moon. Thin, quiet, and scared, Darren walked to them without saying a word. He handed each one a small warm bun and nodded toward the stall. They followed and sat down in silence. When the first bite touched their lips, tears rolled down their cheeks, not because it was the best food they'd ever had, but because it was the first time they'd felt seen. One young alien girl with cracked skin and sad eyes asked, "Why are you helping us?" Darren crouched beside her and gently placed the wooden spoon in her small hand. "Because someone once fed me when I had nothing," he said, "and it saved me." A moment later, the girl stood and held the spoon up like a flag. "I want to cook too," she said proudly. Salary handed her an apron, smiling. Then welcome to the kitchen, and that's how it began. More than just a place to eat, the Kitchen for All became a school, not of fancy recipes or golden awards, but of kindness, healing, and memory. They taught with touch, smell, and heart, no exams, no tests, just meals made with soul. Years passed and still Darren cooked, slower now, older, but his fire never faded. He barely spoke, but people listened anyway. One day, a news crew begged him for one final interview. He agreed under one condition: no cameras. No lights, just one question they asked. "What was your mission all along, Chef Darren?" He paused, looked out at the crowd eating together, laughing, crying, healing, and finally said, "I came to feed the hunger no one sees," and with that, he returned to the stove, the spoon still worn, his hand still steady, the kitchen still warm, and the galaxy still listening,